We have enormous power. We can do things which will be devastating.
This is the translation of the right of Israel to defend itself, that there is no other alternative, and we are doing what we need to do in order to defend our citizens.
Tough talking from Israel's politicians as hundreds are killed in airstrikes on Gaza. But as Israeli warplanes pound Hamas, what are the real objectives in Gaza? And is peace in the Middle East now more elusive than ever? This is Inside Story. Welcome to the programme. I'm Darren Jordan. Israel has launched its bloodiest attack on the Gaza Strip in decades in retaliation for rocket fire from the Hamas-controlled territory. Gaza's been bombarded by Israeli airstrikes, killing over 280 people and leaving more than 600 injured. And those numbers keep rising. Clayton Swisher reports now on the escalating violence between Israel and Hamas.
Day 2 of Israel's Gaza offensive. Lethal airstrikes produce scenes of chaos and casualties. More than 280 have been killed by latest count. It's the single bloodiest 24 hours since the occupation began over 40 years ago. Israel said the strikes it launched were a response to Palestinian rocket fire, which killed a single Israeli on Saturday. It even released this cockpit video, giving the impression the targets were hit with precision. But they were not. And the victims arrive at hospitals that are in no position to cope. They had long ago run out of supplies because of the Israeli siege. Breaking his silence since the onslaught started, the Palestinian president finally offered these stunning remarks.
Let me say this clearly. We contacted Hamas and Hamas leaders in Gaza and spoke to them bluntly, directly and indirectly through several Arab and non-Arab mediators. It is not the time to shun anyone. We spoke to them on the phone and told them, we pleaded, please do not end the ceasefire. Let it continue so we can avert what has now happened. And how I wish we had.
His close allies in the United States agree. It was the outgoing Bush administration that spearheaded sanctions against Abbas's political rivals in Hamas.
The rocket attacks should stop. These rocket attacks have precipitated the current violence.
Quite predictably, the Hamas leadership sees it differently. The negotiations with Israel have proved useless in their eyes, and in a chilling call to arms, they say that now is the time to defend both life and property against Israel's ruthless occupation.
There is no path except that of martyrdom, armed resistance and martyrdom operations. This is what will support Gaza, and this is what will defend the West Bank. This is what will lift the oppression from you. We do not take up arms except in the face of the Zionist enemy. I call upon you to uprise. This is the time for the third intifada.
It's a power imbalance that continues unchecked. Israel says its operations are far from over. The UN stomps its feet. Neighboring governments fail to intervene, and the Arab League is days away from even meeting. Meanwhile, the world watches as Gaza shakes, even burns. Clayton Swisher for Inside Story.
Well, joining us now are our guests in Jerusalem. Mark Regev, spokesman for the Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert. In the Jordanian capital Amman is Azam Tamimi. He's a political analyst and author on Hamas. And in Manchester, Chris Davies, a member of the European Union's parliamentary delegation to the Palestinian Legislative Council. Gentlemen, welcome to the programme. Mark Regev in Jerusalem. Let me start with you, if I may. I mean, why is Israel acting now with such clear, overwhelming force? And is it your clear objective in Gaza to actually topple the Hamas regime?
No, our objective is to safeguard the lives of those Israelis who've been living in the southern part of the country, who've been the victims of ongoing Hamas rocket assaults over the last weeks and months. It wasn't Israel that caused this recent escalation. It was Hamas that very publicly and openly a few days ago tore up the understandings that were reached through Egypt to achieve calm in the south. They did that unilaterally. That was followed a few days later by ongoing barrages of rockets and missiles into Israel from Gaza. I think it was last Thursday, on one day alone, we had some 80 missiles, rockets and mortar shells coming into Israel, targeting Israeli civilians, Israeli cities, Israeli townships, Israeli rural communities. We had to respond to protect our people, and that is the goal of this operation.
So you're categorically saying
to safeguard.
So you're categorically saying that you're not there to topple the Hamas regime in Gaza.
We are saying that this operation is defensive. We wish the calm would have prevailed and this operation wouldn't have been necessary, but we are responding to violence from Gaza into Israel. We're doing what any country would have done in a similar situation. What government can sit by quietly and see its civilian population attacked day after day, week after week, year after year? You know, some 250,000 Israelis living in the southern part of the country have been in the range of these Hamas rockets, 100,000 Israeli children living in bomb shelters. We had to respond to this clear aggression against our people.
OK, let's bring in Dr. Azam Tamimi there in Amman. Azam Tamimi, Mark Regev says it's Hamas's fault. I mean, what do you think is Israel's motive for these attacks, and how significant do you think is the timing of this?
You see, to put this simply, Israel found itself having to deal with either of two parties, either the PNA led by Mahmoud Abbas in Ramallah or by the growing power of Hamas. If they have to deal with Hamas in order to secure themselves, they will have to give a lot less back to the Palestinians of what they stole from them earlier. With Mahmoud Abbas, they can hope to secure themselves for a lot more they can get from him and a lot less they can give back. And therefore, here they find themselves compelled to deal with Mahmoud Abbas and bring him back to Gaza. To do that, they have to crush Hamas. And Israel could not have done what they're doing at the moment had it not been for the collusion of Mahmoud Abbas and the Egyptian regime. And that was very clear. We saw this in the press conference earlier today. Livni was in Cairo before this operation started. And it's not true what the Israeli spokesman is saying, that Hamas started all of this. The breach of the Hudna, of the 6 months Hudna, started with Israelis. The figures are there. They are published. They are on the record for everybody to see. The Israelis were not interested in any truce. The Israelis kept the siege. They kept starving the Palestinians and causing them so much pain and agony. OK, well, let's bring in Chris Davies there in Manchester. I mean, you're slightly more independent to this discussion. I mean, why do you think Israel has gone in now, and how significant is the timing of this, and who do you think's to blame?
Well, the Hamas rockets have killed up to 20 Israelis over the past 5 years. And as far as I'm concerned, that's 20 Israeli civilians too many. They should not have suffered in any way at all. But the reaction from Israel in the past few days, indeed throughout this entire year, in killing hundreds, in slaughtering people in Gaza, in treating Gaza like a goldfish bowl with fish that can be speared, is completely disproportionate. Democratic nations should provide proportionate responses when they are threatened in the way that Israeli citizens have been treated. But the response from Israel is utterly unacceptable.
Mark Regev, how do you respond to that? Chris Davies is saying your response was wholly disproportionate.
If we were to offer a proportionate response, we'd do what Hamas does, and we just indiscriminately target civilian areas throughout the Gaza Strip. And we are not doing that. We are surgically targeting military installations of the Hamas leadership, Hamas military compounds, training centers, arms storage facilities, other parts of their command and control. We are trying to be as surgical as we can be. Our enemy is not the people of the Gaza Strip. On the contrary, we want to live with the people of Gaza in peace. Our enemy are those responsible for shooting rockets into Israel. And just today, we've opened the borders to humanitarian shipments to make sure that medicines and foodstuffs and other important humanitarian supplies arrive in Gaza to the people. We're a difficult operation. We're going to be as surgical as we can be. Once again, the people of Gaza are not our enemies. Our enemies are those who are trying to kill Israeli civilians.
But the fact remains is that civilians have been killed in these airstrikes.
I think you have to be very careful with the data coming out of the Gaza Strip. I mean, every independent analysis will tell you that since Hamas took control in Gaza, they have created a sort of Taliban-type regime. They have slowly but surely eroded independent organizations, civil society. Everything has been brought under the thumb of a very fundamentalist regime, and it's very difficult to get objective analysis of the data coming out. From their point of view, they want to say everyone we've hit is a civilian and we've hit no one from the Hamas military machine. It's just not logical.
All
what
right,
they're
let's
saying.
just bring in back Chris Davis there in Manchester. Chris Davis, there is the view, of course, that isolating Hamas with sanctions and airstrikes and occupations only encourages even more extremist elements. What's your take on that?
Well, I want to make it very clear that I regard Hamas as quite evil, and I think its behaviour and its reactions are stupid. I mean, you cannot simply defeat a power as strong as Israel, backed as it is by the United States and many other countries across the world. So it's really just a David versus Goliath, with David throwing twigs at Goliath. It's just completely pointless. But I think we also have to recognise the disproportionate response from Israel. For every one Israeli citizen who's been killed, and that is every single death is unacceptable. But for every one Israeli who's been killed, the Israelis have killed some 25 people or more in Gaza during the course of the past year. Now, this is equivalent to a warlike situation. The Second World War, for example, where the resistance kill one German soldier and the Germans burn down the entire village and slaughter its inhabitants as a result. That, you know, there's a difference between a genuine war and a war between two armies, between two sets of combatants, and where there is an armed army, an army of one of the strongest armies in the Middle East on one side of the barrier, and a city of 1.5 million people, mostly civilians, on the other side. That's what the whole idea of proportionate responses comes from. It's based into the idea of how democratic nations should behave.
All right, let's get to a final thought before we go to break from Dr. Azam Tamimi. Israel says it's targeting Hamas infrastructure, but I mean, how much does this sort of overwhelming firepower actually galvanize Gazans, perhaps, to resist Israeli occupation even more?
Well, Hamas is more legitimate than any other regime in the region, including Israel. Israel is illegitimate anyway. Hamas reached this position through fair elections. Hamas is not just a military organization. Hamas started as a socio-political group providing essential services to the Palestinians. The media is throughout the Gaza Strip, and I'm astonished whether your Israeli guest is watching television at all or not to see who the victims of his killing machine happen to be. They're mostly civilians. Even the policemen. Why target the policemen? The policemen are the ones who are keeping the order inside the Gaza Strip. They are the ones who were preventing the drug trafficking, the criminals, keeping the order. Most probably they were destroying these institutions because they want to destroy the entire system. They bring down the entire order in order to bring their own lackeys and their own puppets into Gaza.
OK, all right. Well, gentlemen, it's time for a short break now. But when we come back, is there any way out of the faltering peace deals and deadly violence in Gaza? More on that. Stay with us.